May 19, 1962. It was 11 o'clock at night when Marilyn Monroe's private phone rang in her Brentwood home. She almost didn't answer it. She had taken 2 sleeping pills and was trying to rest after another exhausting day of filming. But something told her to pick up. The voice on the other end would change everything. It was President John F. Kennedy, and the conversation that followed would put Marilyn's life in danger. 3 months later, she would be dead. This is the untold story of the phone call that may have sealed Marilyn Monroe's fate. Marilyn's hand shook slightly as she picked up the receiver. She recognized his voice immediately, that distinctive Boston accent, that casual confidence that came from being the most powerful man in the world. "Marilyn," the president said. His voice was warm, familiar. They had known each other for years. "I hope I'm not calling too late." "Mr. President," Marilyn said, sitting up in bed. Her heart was already beating faster. In 1962, a phone call from the President of the United States wasn't something that happened to most people, even movie stars. "Is everything all right?" "I need to talk to you about something important," Kennedy said. "Something private. You're alone?" Marilyn looked around her bedroom. The house was quiet. Her housekeeper had gone home hours ago. "Yes, I'm alone." "Good," Kennedy said. Then his voice changed, became more serious. "Marilyn, I need a favor from you. A big one." Over the next 10 minutes, President Kennedy explained what he needed. He was asking Marilyn to do something that involved traveling to a foreign country, meeting with certain people, delivering a message that couldn't go through official channels. He didn't explain all the details. He said it was better if she didn't know everything, safer that way. "This is important for the country," Kennedy said, "and you're one of the few people I can trust with something like this." Marilyn listened, feeling a strange mixture of emotions. Part of her was flattered. The president trusted her, needed her, saw her as more than just a pretty face. But another part of her was frightened. This didn't sound like a favor. This sounded dangerous. "Why me?" Marilyn asked. "Why not use someone from the State Department or the CIA?" Kennedy was quiet for a moment. "Because those channels are compromised. Because there are people in my own government I can't trust. And because you have access to places and people that official channels don't. Your fame opens doors, Marilyn. Doors that stay closed to everyone else." It made sense in a twisted way. Marilyn Monroe could walk into almost any room in the world. People wanted to meet her, talk to her, be photographed with her. She was famous in a way that transcended politics or borders. But using that fame for espionage, that was something else entirely. "I need to think about it," Marilyn said carefully. "Of course," Kennedy replied, but Marilyn, I need an answer soon. This is time sensitive. Can you call me back tomorrow, same time?" "Yes," Marilyn agreed. "Tomorrow night." "Thank you," Kennedy said. "And Marilyn, this conversation never happened, you understand?" "I understand." But just as Marilyn was about to hang up, she heard something. A faint click on the line. Then another sound, barely audible, like someone taking a breath. Her blood went cold. Someone else was listening. "Mr. President," Marilyn said quietly, "I think someone's on the line." The silence that followed lasted only 3 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Then Kennedy's voice came back, tight with controlled anger. "Hang up now. Don't call this number again. I'll contact you through other channels." The line went dead. Marilyn sat in her bed, the receiver still in her hand, her heart pounding. Someone had been listening to her conversation with the President of the United States, but who? And how much had they heard? She got out of bed and walked through her house, checking windows and doors. Everything was locked. Everything looked normal. But nothing felt normal anymore. She had the distinct sensation of being watched, even though she was alone. Sleep was impossible after that. Marilyn spent the rest of the night sitting in her living room, smoking cigarettes, trying to make sense of what had just happened. She had been in Hollywood long enough to know how power worked, how secrets worked, and she knew that what she had just stumbled into was far more dangerous than any movie script. The next morning, everything seemed different. The newspapers were full of routine stories. The sun came up over Los Angeles like it always did. But Marilyn felt like she was living in a different world now. A world where phones could be tapped and conversations could be monitored, and trusting the wrong person could get you killed. Her phone rang at 9 o'clock. Marilyn jumped, then forced herself to answer calmly. It was her friend, writer Norman Roston. They talked about nothing important, but before he hung up, Norman said something strange. "Marilyn, have you noticed anything unusual lately? Anything that doesn't feel right?" Her stomach tightened. "Why do you ask?" "Just be careful," Norman said quietly. "That's all. Be very careful who you trust." He hung up before she could ask what he meant. But Marilyn was starting to understand. She wasn't the only one who knew that something was wrong. Over the next few days, small strange things started happening. A car that seemed to follow her to the studio. A man in a dark suit standing across the street from her house. Phone calls where no one spoke when she answered. Each incident was small enough to dismiss, but together they created a pattern. Someone was watching Marilyn Monroe, and that someone had resources and patience. What Marilyn didn't know was that J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI, had been monitoring her activities for years. Hoover kept files on thousands of Americans, but his file on Marilyn was particularly detailed. He knew about her relationships with powerful men. He knew about her political sympathies, her friendships with people he considered suspicious, and he definitely knew about her connection to President Kennedy. The phone tap on Marilyn's home line had been authorized by Hoover personally. He had been listening to her conversations for months, waiting for something he could use. The Kennedy phone call had given him exactly what he wanted: proof of a direct connection, proof that could be used as leverage, as blackmail, as a weapon. But Hoover wasn't the only one listening. The organized crime networks that ran much of the illegal activity in America also had an interest in President Kennedy and his brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy. The Kennedy brothers had declared war on the mafia, using the full power of the Justice Department to prosecute mob bosses. The mafia was looking for any weakness they could exploit, any pressure point they could use to make the Kennedys back off. Marilyn Monroe, with her connections to both Kennedy brothers, was exactly that kind of pressure point. 3 days after the phone call, Marilyn received a visitor. She was at home, trying to learn her lines for the troubled film Something's Got to Give, when her housekeeper announced that a man was at the door. He said he was from the State Department. Marilyn's first instinct was to refuse to see him, but curiosity won out. She went to the door. The man was in his 40s, wearing a gray suit and thin-rimmed glasses. He had the look of a government bureaucrat, bland, forgettable, exactly the kind of person who could disappear into any crowd. "Miss Monroe," he said politely, "my name is Robert Marshall. I work for the State Department. May I come in? This will only take a moment." Marilyn hesitated, then stepped aside. The man walked into her living room and sat down without being invited. The casual arrogance of the gesture told Marilyn that this man was used to being obeyed. "I'm going to be direct," Marshall said. "We know about the phone call. We know what the president asked you to do, and we're here to tell you that accepting that assignment would be a serious mistake." "Who is we?" Marilyn asked. Marshall smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. "Let's just say there are people in the government who have concerns about certain activities. People who believe that some decisions being made at the highest levels are dangerous for national security. We're trying to prevent mistakes that could harm the country." "By spying on the president?" Marilyn said. By protecting America from reckless decisions, Marshall corrected. Miss Monroe, you're being used. The president is asking you to do something that could put you in serious danger. And if something happens to you while you're on this mission, do you think the president will take responsibility? Do you think he'll admit that he sent you? The answer was obvious. Of course he wouldn't. If Marilyn got caught or hurt or killed doing whatever Kennedy wanted, she would be on her own. The president would deny everything. That's how power worked. The people at the top stayed safe, while the people at the bottom took the risks. What do you want from me? Marilyn asked. We want you to decline the president's request, Marshall said. Tell him you can't help him. Then forget this conversation ever happened. Go back to making movies, live your life. Stay out of things that are too dangerous for you to understand. The condescension in his voice made Marilyn angry. Too dangerous for me to understand? You mean I'm too stupid to be trusted with important information? I mean, you're an actress, Miss Monroe. A very talented, very beautiful actress. But this isn't a movie. This is real. And the people involved in these matters play for keeps. They don't give second chances. Marshall stood up, preparing to leave. You have 48 hours to contact the president and decline his request. If you don't, we'll assume you've decided to help him. And that would be unfortunate. For everyone. He walked to the door, then paused. One more thing, Miss Monroe. Your phone conversations aren't as private as you think they are. Be very careful what you say and who you say it to. You never know who might be listening. He left. Marilyn stood in her living room, shaking. The message was clear. They were watching her. They could reach her any time they wanted. And if she didn't do what they wanted, there would be consequences. For the first time in her life, Marilyn Monroe understood what it felt like to be truly trapped. That night, Marilyn did something she had never done before. She wrote down everything that had happened. The Kennedy phone call, the strange visitor, the threats. She wrote it all in a red diary that she kept hidden in her bedroom. If something happened to her, she wanted there to be a record. She wanted someone to know the truth, but who could she trust? Her manager, the studio, the police? Every institution that should have protected her felt compromised now. She was one woman against forces she couldn't see or fully understand, and she was running out of time. The 48-hour deadline came and went. Marilyn didn't contact Kennedy. She didn't accept his mission, but she didn't officially decline either. She simply stayed silent, hoping that silence would keep her safe. It didn't. 2 weeks later, Marilyn was fired from Something's Got to Give. The studio claimed she was unreliable, missing too many days of filming, but people close to the production said the decision came from higher up. Someone with influence had made a phone call to the studio executives. Someone who wanted Marilyn isolated, unemployed, vulnerable. Her phone started ringing at all hours. Sometimes there was heavy breathing on the other end. Sometimes silence. Sometimes a voice would say something cryptic before hanging up. We're watching. Time is running out. Make the right choice. Marilyn started taking more sleeping pills, started drinking more, started canceling appointments and avoiding friends. Her behavior became erratic, unpredictable. People who loved her were worried, but no one knew what was really happening. No one knew about the invisible war being fought over her. On August 4th, 1962, Marilyn Monroe was found dead in her bedroom. The official cause of death was listed as probable suicide from an overdose of barbiturates. But the circumstances were strange. The timeline didn't make sense. Witnesses gave contradictory statements. Evidence disappeared, and the red diary where Marilyn had written about the Kennedy phone call was never found. In the decades since Marilyn's death, researchers have uncovered troubling facts. FBI documents released years later confirmed that Hoover had been monitoring Marilyn. Phone records show multiple calls between Marilyn and the Kennedy brothers in the weeks before her death. Neighbors reported seeing strange cars outside her house, and several people who were close to Marilyn have said on the record that she was afraid for her life in those final weeks. Was Marilyn Monroe murdered? Or did the pressure, the fear, the isolation, and the surveillance drive her to take her own life? We may never know the complete truth, but what we do know is that a phone call on May 19, 1962, put Marilyn Monroe in the crosshairs of forces far more powerful than any movie studio. Forces that saw her not as a person, but as a problem to be solved. Peter Lawford, Kennedy's brother-in-law and Marilyn's friend, said years later, "Marilyn knew too much. She knew things about people in power that made her dangerous, and dangerous people have a way of dying young in this country." The night before Marilyn died, she made a phone call to her friend, Sidney Skolsky. "Sidney," she said, her voice slurred from pills and alcohol, "if something happens to me, it wasn't an accident. There are people who want me gone. Promise me you'll tell the truth." Sidney promised. But after Marilyn died, he stayed silent for decades. Fear will do that. It makes even the bravest people careful about what they say and who they say it to. The Kennedy phone call was never officially acknowledged. President Kennedy died 15 months after Marilyn, assassinated in Dallas under circumstances that remain controversial to this day. J. Edgar Hoover continued running the FBI until his death in 1972, his secret files giving him power over presidents and politicians. And the men who visited Marilyn that May, who threatened her, who surveilled her, most of them were never identified. But the pattern is clear. In the spring of 1962, Marilyn Monroe accidentally stepped into a world of political intrigue and espionage that she wasn't equipped to navigate. She was used by powerful men who saw her fame as a tool. And when she became more trouble than she was worth, she was discarded. Whether by murder or by driving her to suicide, the result was the same. Marilyn Monroe died at 36 years old. Beautiful, famous, alone, and possibly silenced before she could tell what she knew. The complete truth about May 19, 1962 died with her. But the questions remain. What exactly did President Kennedy ask Marilyn to do? Who else was listening to that phone call? What happened in the 3 months between the Kennedy phone call and Marilyn's death? And most importantly, could she have been saved? If Marilyn had refused Kennedy immediately, would she still be alive? If she had gone public with what she knew, would that have protected her or sealed her fate faster? If she had trusted the right people, could they have helped? Or was she doomed the moment she picked up the phone that night? We'll never know. But what we do know is that fame doesn't protect you from power. Beauty doesn't save you from politics. And being Marilyn Monroe, the most famous woman in the world, didn't stop invisible forces from deciding she was expendable. The Red Diary was never found. Some believe it was destroyed. Others think it still exists somewhere, hidden, waiting to reveal secrets that powerful people don't want revealed. Marilyn's FBI file, released decades after her death, had pages missing. Entire sections were redacted. The full truth was buried with her. But this much is certain. On May 19, 1962, Marilyn Monroe answered a phone call that changed everything. And 3 months later, she was dead. Coincidence? Maybe. But in a world where phones are tapped, conversations are monitored, and people who know too much have unfortunate accidents, coincidences are hard to believe. Marilyn Monroe was many things. An actress, an icon, a symbol. But she was also a woman who accidentally became a pawn in games played by presidents and spies. And pawns in those games are always sacrifices. If this story made you see Marilyn Monroe differently, if it made you question the official story of her death, if it reminded you that power plays by different rules than the rest of us, Then subscribe to our channel for more untold stories from Hollywood's darkest corners. Hit that like button if you believe Marilyn deserved better than she got. And tell us in the comments, do you think Marilyn Monroe's death was really suicide? Or was she silenced before she could tell what she knew? The truth is buried, but the questions remain.